Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join our weekly Hebrew word study. I hope the last 2 weeks, where we took a little bit of a sidetrack and looked at the verse that Jesus read in Isaiah, I hope that was interesting to you. I could have spent more time on it, but certainly didn't want to get too deep. But to me, those are just fascinating things to study. But today we're back in First Samuel chapter 25, picking up. And as if you remember, the story was of David having this encounter with this man named Nabal or Nabal. And of course, Nabal treated David's men very harshly. And he had a wife named Abigail who interceded and kept David's men from causing harm on Nabal and his family and all his hired servants. And then right after that, Nabal had an episode where his heart turned to stone, and then it said that God kind of smote him and finished him off. So we're picking up here after that dramatic episode to see what goes on next. And so we come to verse 39, and it's interesting. It says, David heard that Nabal was dead, and the Hebrew goes like this: is Vayishma David ki met, which is the word for dead. You may be more familiar with the word mot or mut being used for dead. This is just the same form, a little different vowel pointing. Naval, and then Vayomer, he said. And here's where it gets interesting, and our study kind of starts today. David goes into this somewhat of a prayer, somewhat of a praise. And when you start learning Hebrew, these will be some very familiar words for you is Baruch, which means blessed. So Baruch Yahweh Asher. So blessed be Yahweh. You see there's no verb in there. In the parentheses, the translators put the verb in. So David was just saying, blessed Yahweh. Um, and then Asher Rav et Rivi, or Reeve. And so what you'll see here is these words translated as pleaded and the cause of are almost the same word. That's the resh and the bet, but they're translated differently. So that's what caused me to first notice. Let's take a look at what this means in our dictionary. And the word reeve means to strive or contend, used many times in the Bible, translated as contend or strive most of the time. So he's saying, blessed is Yahweh who contends or strives. And then the next word is also strive. So we'll open that up and we see it's the same spelling, same word. And so what's interesting here, what is David saying? In the Hebrew, it says, blessed is Yahweh who strives for me against those who strive against me. So it's kind of an interesting word situation, and it sounds very poetic. The Rav et Reeve, and then the word for reproach is herpati miyad, at the hand of Naval, and then va'et, you'll see here the use of the direct object marker, the aleph and the tav, pointing to what is the focus or what is the subject that of importance here in this verse. And so David is referring to himself as an avdo, his servant. So he's saying, Va'et avdo sach mera'ah, has kept thy servant, his servant, from evil. Interesting, in the Bible, in the Hebrew, again, there are not a lot of words that give us a lot of precise definitions. So the word for Ra, which is resh and ayin, is used many times throughout the Bible, and it can mean anything from a consuming passion to evil to even friendship, because a friendship can be a passionate engagement of protecting your friend. Like when it says, the Lord is my shepherd, it uses the Ra word to designate the shepherd, someone who is passionate about protecting his sheep and his flock. So, again, that makes it interesting as we look at the words for evil to try to discern, did it mean evil the way we understand it in the 21st century, or could it have meant something different back then? So David is not saying that there was evil in him. He is more referencing that he had a temper and that his zeal and his passion, that God has kept him from um, going off half-cocked, if you will, to use that metaphor, or kept him from doing something while he was just enraged, and God has protected him. And so he's using this word here in that form. He kept his servant from this consuming passion of rage uh, against the wickedness of Nabal. And then it says here that God has returned upon Nabal what was due him. Um, what I find interesting here is there's two parts to this. First of all, David is giving thanks that God helped control his temper so that it didn't lead to bad behavior. But then he's also thanking God that God administered judgment upon this man, Nabal. Now, if you remember what Nabal did, he didn't hurt anybody, he didn't kill someone, he didn't steal anything from David. He just refused to give David payment for David being kind to him and protecting him. It does not seem like it warrants a death sentence or such drastic measures to be taken to exact judgment upon this man. So there had to be something more going on here that we certainly don't understand. And I think David is saying to God that God did um, judgment, not just based upon what happened here with David, but taking into all of the account of what kind of person Nabal was, the wickedness that he had done through his entire life, and the wickedness that he would continue to do if left unchecked. And so David is, I believe, um, praising God for that, not just for what he had done in the instance of uh, the episode with David. And so then here, this is interesting. This is all one verse, but there's a lot of dynamics going up inside of here. And after this, uh, we really need to have a break. It should have had a separate chapter, if anything, because it goes right into David sending to Abigail and taking her as his wife. I mean, this is really hard to process because um, we don't know how much time has passed here, but obviously this is not years. And this was the guy's wife that uh, you know, was mourning for her husband. We don't know how long they were married. We do seem to be able to piece together that this probably wasn't not a very happy relationship. If she was so kind-hearted and had wisdom and could see the need that David had, and her husband was totally the opposite, you could almost imagine that she is trapped in this very oppressive arrangement, very much suffering because of it. And maybe there's a miracle in here of God answering her prayer to take her out of an abusive relationship. We also see that there's an absence of any children being talked about here, which is normally you would think would occur very quickly, as it was common in those days that the main reason for marriages was to procreate and to have a family. And so you don't know how much older Abigail is than David, but there's obviously no children in the picture here, which gives us another understanding that this was not a good relationship and that it was not one that she was probably going to grieve much over the loss of this of her husband, because they had no love relationship there to begin with. I say that as I'm trying to process how quickly David comes and proposes to her, and she just jumps off and says, "Okay, yep, sounds good. I'll be your wife, and let's get on with it," um, and not feel that she had to grieve or that there was anything there in her past life that she would want to hang on to of her relationship with previous husband, Nabal. So the other part that's interesting here is, okay, did David just send servants to come and fetch her? I mean, that is really the translation that we get here, and that's where the Hebrew really helps us see that more went on than what the English lets us know. So we get to this part here of Vayishlach, and David sent. Now, in many English translations, it'll say that David sent servants to her. But really, this is giving the indication that David sent himself because of the language that's being used here. Vaidaber means language from the heart. And if you look underneath, it has the um, verb conjugation of being in a PL form, which means it's very intensive from the heart. It's not really something you can put in a letter or Instagram or email and compose something that would convey what David was wanting to do. So this part here gives me the understanding that David came, spoke words from his heart to Abigail. He also probably had a relationship formed with her while she was intervening um, previously to keep him from killing her husband and all the family, that somehow they talked, they got to know each other. David saw something in Abigail that he desired to take care of her, to protect her, and to take her as his wife. And so this was all going on uh, behind the scenes, if you will, or just not totally spoken about in the scriptures. So David comes to her, talks with her words from the heart. It seems that he then leaves and gives her time to think about it. And so then with that, then we come to another episode here where the end of verse 39 into verse 40, it says, "Vai Yavo'u, and when had come of day, servants of David, um, El Avigail to Abigail in the location," and this is critical here that this is Hakarmelah in Carmel. So she is back at home, and these servants came and Vaidaberu, they spoke to her. Again, these are words from the heart. It wasn't something written, but it was definitely, they knew what David's desire was. And so, Eleha le more David. And so they spoke to her saying that David sent us, shall lachanu elahik, sent us to you. And then the word is kind of interesting here, and it's translated to ask you to become his wife. But the word is not ask, if it is to take. If we open it up, it is the word lakach, which means to take, and used very commonly throughout the Bible anytime a marriage is created, that the woman is taken. And of course, that is not very popular in our vernacular today. And I don't think it means the same thing as what it meant back then. We don't have a complete understanding. I don't believe it was a violent taking by force. I don't believe it was against their will, but it was a more of a assuming and assimilating into the relationship. But so that's why they say it's to ask, but the word really means to take you, la isha. So again, very interesting scenario here of David posing to Abigail. She knew he was coming back. He sent his servants and said, okay, now we're here to complete this situation. And again, we don't know how much time it took. There may have been a break in here where she was able to grieve, where she was able to collect things together, think about what David had said to her in the previous meeting, that they were together, and now was able to accept his proposal and the servants that came to take her back to where he was encamped. So again, so much beauty and poetry and wonderful understanding that can be gained from the Hebrew. And I hope you enjoyed that. And thank you so much for staying tuned and following these episodes each week. And pray God's blessing upon you. And we'll see you again next week. Bye bye.